So good evening, everyone, and good morning to our friends in Singapore. Venerable Chodron is right now, I'm sure, teaching on the three principal aspects of the path at Shantideva Center in New York. It's, 9 o'clock there? Yeah, so she's just begun her public teaching tour on the East Coast, and she'll be headed to Europe. So we'll have a number of weeks where different Abbey monastics will be leading reviews. And we are on Following in the Buddha's Footsteps, Volume 4 of the Library of Wisdom and Compassion. And we're going to review the chapter on the 3 higher trainings and ethical conduct. So that's chapter 4. And I'm expecting all of you to do the hard work because I sent out some discussion questions. So, this is a topic we all are fairly familiar with. So I'm sure everyone will have something to contribute. So before we begin, as usual, we'll do our prayers and then sit quietly for some time, and I'll set a motivation. So let's take a moment to connect with the Buddha in the space in front of us.
I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger.
So let's just come back to our breath. So here at the Abbey, our practice tradition is in the Tibetan Buddhist lineage. And our monastics take our precepts in what is called the Dharma-guptaka Vinaya lineage, that is extant in the Chinese tradition, because it's the only one right now where there is full ordination for women that is, fully established and thriving, though it's been revived in the Theravada tradition as well. And one of the key texts that is studied by monastics in this lineage is called the Notes and Charts on the Characteristics of the Bhikshu or Bhikshuni Precepts. Yeah. And it's a very, very detailed text. It draws from the scriptures and commentaries, and it's like a huge compendium helping you to understand the characteristics of every single precept that you have, how to uphold it, what are the transgressions, what happens if you break it, and so forth. And the first compendium was compiled for the monks by a monk named Master Hong Yi, who did this in 1921. And subsequently, many years later, one was done for the nuns by a nun called Bhikshuni Sheng Yu. And she did this in 1943 in Beijing. And so, none of these texts are in English, and I work a lot on this translation. And as I was just looking at this text, I was just struck by how, she must have been working on this huge compendium and working out the details of it and adding to it for the nuns throughout the Second World War. Yeah, in 1943, Beijing was under Japanese occupation. The war in China had raged from 1937 up to that point, and the country was really torn apart. The Japanese occupation was extremely brutal. And I just wonder what it was like for her. In the middle of all this chaos, she's working on this text on how to keep good ethical conduct, going back to the details in the scriptures, looking at what the monks before her have put together. And somehow I find that very moving, that no matter what is going on in this world, even if it seems like your country is completely falling apart, that things don't make any sense anymore, you come back to your practice, starting with ethical conduct. What are the training guidelines you want to live by, how you want to uphold them, and, if you can, creating resources for others to do the same. And so throughout the war, she dedicated her life to putting together this very important text that till today is studied by monastics in the Chinese tradition. And I'm sure she would never have expected that, 82 years later, people in America are trying to read and understand it and put it into practice in a very, very different cultural context. So no matter what seems to be happening around us, we have to come back to the fundamentals of our practice, to stay grounded in the values that we want to uphold, and to live them out based on the causes and conditions around us. And we do this not just to keep ourselves calm and peaceful and sane, but knowing that by keeping good ethical conduct, we are creating causes for future happiness, not just for ourselves, but for all the beings around us. And that is the first step for us to continue to progress along the path to attain subsequent higher rebirths, to continuously transform our minds until we attain our fullest potential, such that we can be of the greatest benefit to all beings in this very chaotic, suffering situation that we call cyclic existence, that really doesn't come to an end until we figure out what the causes are to get ourselves and others out. So with this kind of vast view, let's engage in this review today to share our own practice of ethical conduct, reflect on how it's been working in our lives, and to do that to support each other so that we can continuously progress along the path to awakening. Okay. So one of the questions I wanted to get into before we dive back into the text is the question, before you heard the Buddha's teachings, what was your motivation for keeping good ethical conduct or not keeping good ethical conduct? Because, I think if we don't do that, like implicit underneath that are our views about what ethical conduct means, right? And then we're like, nah, forget it. I'm not going to bother. And then did your motivation change after you heard the Buddha's teachings? Venerable Semke. Thank you. So we'll pass the microphone around and make sure you press it and you see the green light go on. Then you'll be able to be heard by the online audience. And of course, our friends online are welcome to join in as well.
Well, looking over this, it was a good question. And I came to realize that my upbringing had a lot to do with being a fairly okay kid, raised in a pretty strict Catholic family, went to Catholic school for 12 years. So the crowd and the circumstance and the environment, going to church, studying religion, about all the good things that I should be trying to cultivate. So growing up, I got a little wild in high school, but it was only after I left school that I started to explore things that were not quite in line with how I'd been raised. And then, so it was mostly just being, not exactly enforced, but being influenced a lot by my religious, the faith of how I grew up. Jesus was a big part of my life in my young years. I loved his Sermon on the Mount. I liked who he was. I liked how he handled people. And I really liked the whole thing. I liked the story. And then when I kind of broke loose after 12 years of Catholic education, I went to Colorado, where drugs, sex, and rock and roll were the more interesting kind of lifestyle that I explored. And so I got a little bit off of wanting to be there were all kinds of groups when you get into, those kind of cultures. And so I got a little bit reckless. It was mostly because I wanted to fit in. I wanted to have a good reputation. I wanted to belong. And so for some of those years, I was pretty much following the crowd. And then, so that kind of continued through my life. In the process, I met some friends that had some ethical conduct. They were usually quite a bit older than me, had been there, done that, and learned some lessons. And so I got to have some mentors in my life that kind of helped me get back around. But when I met the Dharma, especially when I started to hear the teachings on karma, that really changed not just if you don't get caught, it's okay thinking. Got to be careful what you do. There are repercussions. So I started being a lot more mindful and being more aware of how I navigate around ethical conduct when I want what I want. But the teachings on karma, the teachings on ethical conduct, the teachings on the fact that when I'm not keeping ethical conduct and I'm afflicted, the possibility of me being able to grow my good qualities cannot arise. And so over the years, I've really used the ethical conduct and the teachings on karma to really kind of clean up my act in a way that and the precepts, of course, really help a lot. So I've always been kind of a little bit like follow the rules kind of person, but these make a lot more sense rather than the punishment reward thinking. So I've really found myself much more in line with my bigger values than that I had as I went through my life.
Thank you, Rishika. And as we were passing the mic over to her, I wanted to say, I think that's a really helpful kind of framework. I think all of us, when we come into the world, there's some kind of assumptions about what ethical conduct means, whether it's conveyed by the religion of our origin, that we were raised in, right? The family and circumstances that we're shaped by. And it's almost like the unquestioned fabric of our being, right? And then at some point in adolescence, we're like, meh, or challenge it, question it, let's break away with varying consequences. And along the way, if we find our way back to some kind of ethical framework, that has to come from a lot of our own logic and reasoning, I think. Yeah, like you had to meet these teachings and really think them through, right? Like not just accept them at face value. So thanks. Rashika?
I guess kind of in my early days, kind of looking in retrospect to being exposed to Buddhism, I don't think I really understood what ethical conduct was. I mean, I had some semblance like don't kill anyone, but I often remember being said, follow your heart. But it's like, what if my heart's not in a good place? Or, like thinking certain qualities like lashing out in anger out of compassion. It seems like the world's idea of ethics and Buddhism ethics, kind of in the sense that what results it'll bring in your life and others and how it will impact the world as a whole. And also too, when I was growing up, I grew up Christian. There was always an exception. You shouldn't lie, but if this person feels really bad, you can tell a white lie. My brain's like, wait, that's still a lie. So it started to get into this kind of murky waters of you choose when to do these things. And I just know that caused a lot of confusion, because what I found is, I don't know about anybody else, but I always found a reason to justify why I wanted to do it. I wanted a candy bar, oh, it's got milk, yeah, that's cocoa, something. So, but when I came to Buddhism and really understood what ethical conduct meant and kind of how it impacts everybody's life, my behavior really, first it was gross, like my actions come into line, but now as I'm growing, I see that also my mind.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we all resonate with that we're told this is ethical, and then you look at the people around you, it's like, I was thinking about this in relation to my parents recently. I don't know if they're watching, but just how like what things they would tell the truth about and what they wouldn't. Like for my dad, he was very much a rule follower who would tell the truth always about like library fines, pay all your fines, follow the rule of the law. But talking about his actual feelings was extremely hard. Like he could not tell us what he was feeling. And that, in a way, to us as his family members, was a bit of a lie, right? It's like, you were really upset, but you didn't tell us. Why? And whereas my mom was like, oh, whatever, we don't have to pay that fine. And she would tell you if she was upset, straight up. You knew. So yeah, we make these choices. When is it truth? When is it a lie? And is it just up to us to figure out, or are there other principles at play, right? How does it affect other people? How does it affect our future life? What are the consequences? Yeah. Anyone else wanted to share thoughts on that, Nicole?
So I think my ethical framework before encountering the Dharma and really studying it had to do with what I thought would be harmful to society at large or individuals I knew. Those are the kind of actions that I tried to avoid. But if it was an action that was against something or someone that I thought was doing harm, then it was fair game, right? Like the Robin Hood mentality, rob the rich and give to the poor. That is the good way. That was kind of the way that I thought. Yeah, the Dharma has definitely done a lot to transform that thinking in terms of multiple lives, and really taking ownership of my own experience has made me think about the things that other people do that I may not approve of are put into a completely different framework with the view of karma and rebirth. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, thank you. Venerable Rinchen?
So I was raised with my parents being very
good examples. I can't recall seeing my parents lie or cheat or steal until maybe I was in high school. I can think of one situation. So I didn't have that situation growing up where it's like, do what I say, not what I do. And so, telling the truth and not taking things, like those were really drilled into me. And so I think it was just that habituation in a way where it's like, good people don't do that. As I got older, it was kind of, I think my internalization was effectively this is what keeps society from falling apart. And it's, that's something that I can still see myself clinging to in terms of just rules in general, not necessarily ethical conduct. But thinking about other sentient beings is something that definitely within Buddhism has shifted my framework. I didn't, there are situations that I purify, killing insects and things like that when I was younger, that I just didn't consider the fact that they were sentient beings who wanted to live and be happy and not suffer. So that perspective has definitely shifted my ethical conduct in terms of, I'm not just going to kill a human being, but I also don't want to kill the worms. I don't want to kill the wasps, because I see that, they are just like me. And so that is definitely a shift that's come into it. And just thinking more critically, as you said, about these boundaries, like, what does it actually mean to steal or to lie, and what excuses were I making? What was I actually making for myself? So this idea that there's more natural consequences to these actions, and not just this question of whether, what I think is good or not.
Thank you. Rishika has something to add.
Just this last thing, because just thinking about ethical conduct in Buddhism, it kind of has such a farther reach in my mind. Like, I just realized I normally jaywalk. I actually felt like a loser sitting there waiting for the light, to say I can walk. But when I thought about it, certain, like, this wouldn't be considered ethical, but following the rules brings comfort, because if the person knows the rules and they see me following the rules, my behavior is predictable. They feel more comfortable and at ease. Like, I wouldn't have thought about jaywalking prior to Buddhism. But when you really think about it, when you kind of follow those rules, they understand the rules, they see that you follow them, they can predict your behavior, and they feel more at ease with you. So that's just my thought.
I think we're all grinning because Venerable Chodron jaywalks. Anyway, to the detriment of her students' well-being. But anyhow. Right. Yes, she has places to go, that's true. And people to benefit, yes. But yeah, so what I'm hearing all around is that, just the Buddhist teachings just expands our view about who is involved in terms of ethical conduct, right? It's not just to the people we consider good. Those are the ones we don't harm, right? Even beings who have harmed others also should be recipients of this ethical framework. We don't want to kill them or harm them in any way. And also expanding to beings of different realms, animals, seen and unseen beings. So I was thinking about this in this question, mainly because I read this book recently that I think a number of people in the community have read, and it's In Love with the World, A Monk's Journey Through the Bardos of Living and Dying by Mingyur Rinpoche. Anyway, in a nutshell, he was ordained at age 11, I think. He comes from a family of realized, they are recognized to be incarnations of realized beings, right? So his own father was recognized, and his siblings as well. So it's a very special kind of Buddhist family, kind of the elite, I guess. Or he would say he grew up like a prince in some ways, always treated, with utmost respect and reverence. And he had grown into this position of abbot and teacher, and he wanted to kind of challenge those identities. So he decided to go on a wandering retreat, where for the first time in his life, he leaves his monastery with no attendants, some money in a backpack, and heads off on his own. Yeah, so he goes off and meditates in different places. It's a really marvelous, very introspective account of all the things that come up for him on this journey. And then he has a near-death experience, unfortunately, or well, fortunately in a way that he completely uses it for his practice. But, in part of his near-death experience, he starts to, of course, reflect on his ethical behavior. And I just want to read the 2 paragraphs that really struck me. And so he's in the extremely ill, and somehow still meditating through it because of all his decades of practice. I don't think I would be so clear-minded. And he starts to think, okay, I really am approaching death. And he says, now I had to ask if fear of hell was what really had kept me on the straight and narrow. And then he starts to think about, all the things that he had done in the past that were non-virtuous. And he said, I could recall no other deeds that I had performed that could be considered destructive or immoral, aside from, I think, 2 incidents from his childhood, breaking birds' eggs and stealing sugar. And then he reflects, something was not right. That my most monstrous delinquencies were breaking birds' eggs and pocketing sugar when I was about 7 years old did not sound credible even to myself. So, that's he was a monk from a very young age. And then he looks deeper and he says, only in the apparent twilight of my life could I see that my fidelity to virtue was fueled by being a goody-goody, always trying to please my father and my tutors, competing to be the best student. Although I was introverted and timid in groups, I wanted to be noticed and to receive approval. I had thought I was using fear as a tool for renunciation, a strategy to stay oriented toward positive activity. In retrospect, I was hiding behind conventions of goodness and acting virtuous in order to receive praise. Yeah, right. Ouch, indeed. But, I think we've all seen that in ourselves, yeah? But I thought this was just so remarkable. But it's the same trajectory, only he grows up in this Buddhist royal family, so to speak, takes all these things for granted. And this is his way of challenging it, his adolescence, right, going off on his own. And he really has to check, why do I keep ethical conduct? And I was just so blown away by his transparency. Or he's like, wow, this is just driven by my attachment to reputation. And all of us monastics are maybe nodding because we've done that, right? Why am I keeping this precept? Just, it'll look good. Or, or people in the community are like, really? You did that? I'm like, oh, yeah, but you haven't actually thought through why it matters. Yeah. So I think here in our practice of ethical conduct in the Buddhist context, motivation is everything, right? Tomorrow morning, we're going to make dedications that say, I want to practice ethical conduct without conceit. Ethical conduct and ethical conduct without conceit. Yeah, that line always hits me back because I definitely practice ethical conduct with conceit, so it's just a good reminder. And I think that's what distinguishes the 3 higher trainings. And that's really important to remember, I think, as we go through this whole section, to constantly ask ourselves, okay, how is this practice of the ethical conduct, concentration, and wisdom, how is my practice of this part of the 3 higher trainings? How is it different from the ethical conduct or concentration or wisdom practiced by non-Buddhists? Or before I was a Buddhist, what did I think these things were? Right, and how is my practice of it now different? Yeah. And we're not just practicing ethical conduct with the understanding of karma and rebirth anymore, which is what all of us were mentioning, right? It's not enough just to be afraid of hell, right? But we're going a level further. Yeah, we're trying to practice this as part of the middle scope, right? We're with a very different goal, not just for our own good rebirth, but as one of the 3 higher trainings. So I thought to highlight here in this chapter on page 92, right in the middle, there's a very nice definition of, what makes the 3 higher trainings higher that I think I should print out and paste on my wall at least. So His Holiness says, most spiritual paths contain some practice in ethical conduct, concentration, and wisdom. But as followers of the Buddha, we refer to ours as the 3 higher trainings. These practices are higher in 3 ways. They are done with refuge in the 3 jewels, indicating they are higher than those of non-Buddhists. Yeah, so, this is where we are in our study of this whole series, right? We've just finished the teachings on refuge, right? And so now our practice of what is ethical is coming in this context of understanding what a Buddha is, right? Why a Buddha practiced this path, what are his teachings? Why does ethical conduct actually lead to higher states of being? Yeah, do we believe that? Yeah, and then there are all these other beings who have attained realizations on that basis. So that's one. And then next, the second way that practice of these 3 higher trainings is higher is they are infused with the understanding of selflessness, showing that they lead to the higher aim of eradicating ignorance. And then they are done with the aspiration for liberation or full awakening, making them higher than doing them to attain a fortunate rebirth. So I think that's really important for us to keep coming back to, especially when we get into also concentration and wisdom. Yeah, because a lot of non-Buddhist traditions practice concentration. And so how is our practice of these 3 higher trainings actually done with refuge or done with an understanding of selflessness? Like, the goal is not just to be good for its own sake or have someone pat you on the head and give you gold stars, but it's supposed to lead us to understand the nature of reality, to help us to be liberated and awakened. That's tough. And then this is like just in the middle scope, right? And then we have to get to eventually the perfection of ethical conduct, which is done with the motivation of bodhicitta and some understanding of emptiness, whole different level. Yeah, so it gets more and more subtle and profound, I would say. Yeah. So yeah, I just wish I had read this paragraph so long ago, mainly because, ages ago when I first became Buddhist, one time my dad and I were in the car just discussing, my parents are not religious at all. Yeah, and in the car he was like, so why are you Buddhist? Like, what are the benefits of it? And one of the things I was talking to him about was, I'm very happy that I took precepts, that I feel that they are a safeguard in my life. I see a lot of benefit. And my dad was like, what? He's like, I don't kill, I don't steal, I don't engage in sexual misconduct, I don't lie, and I don't drink. He's like, what's the big deal? So I don't do any of those things. So, and then why do I need to become a Buddhist? And at the time I was kind of stumped. I was like, I can't talk to him about merit. He doesn't believe in merit, right? Because, we have that whole, the argument that, because you've made this strong commitment, right? For someone who has made this commitment, I'm never going to kill for the rest of my life. Compared to someone who hasn't made that commitment, we are accumulating this kind of positive potential, right? Even though both of us are sitting in a room together, none of us are killing, but I'm making more merit, yeah, because I've made this commitment, yeah. And going to keep it, hopefully, yeah. So he's not going to buy that argument, right? So yeah, I wish I had thought of, I had known this, right? That it leads to higher states, right? It brings about a certain level of mental peace and concentration that we're going to use for a greater purpose. Yeah. Did anyone else have ideas of what you would say to my dad? No? Yes, Mark.
What comes to mind for me is that through practicing in this way and through taking precepts, I become more free so that I can be of more use to others. And that is something that has been important to me my entire life, long before I met the Dharma. And the things that interfere with my usefulness to others are attachment and ignorance and anger and all of these things.
Do you have a specific example of how taking the precepts actually made you more free?
It's difficult to think of one specific thing, but, and this is more aligned with your earlier question, virtuous actions for me, before I met the Dharma, in terms of actions of body, speech, and mind, I had actions of body and speech that were virtuous, but the mental state behind them was almost always tied to one of the 8 worldly concerns: attachment to praise, aversion to criticism, aversion to physical or emotional pain, was the intention behind the action that looked virtuous or the speech that looked virtuous. And after I met the Dharma and I became aware of these things and was taught these things, it just really changed my mind in a way that's hard to describe. I mean, I'm sure the people here understand what I'm trying to say. And that is what created this freedom. And taking precepts is accountability, and it just makes it easier. It makes it more sort of habitual to be helpful and to understand my own mind a little bit better and my own motivation a little bit better. And that helps me to be helpful to others.
Thank you. Yeah, but you're right, though. It's the 8 worldly concerns. Like, that's why I was so glad Mingyur Rinpoche was the one who brought this up, right? It's so sneaky. You can have spent your whole life immersed in Buddhist training, and there it is, right there at the time of death. You're like, staring you in the face. Yeah. But I will say, even before the time of death, every time I've done things with the 8 worldly concerns, it comes back to bite you in the butt. Sorry for the expression, but if I'm keeping ethical conduct for that reason, I won't be as convinced that it's important to uphold that precept. When no one's looking, or it only concerns me, none of the Sangha know. Right? Doesn't matter. Yeah, because that's the logic behind why I'm keeping the precepts. Yeah, it's to look good. Right? So if no one knows that I look bad, then I can do it. Yeah, so those are like the dangerous conclusions that we come to when the motivation is off course. So I think Mark touched on many helpful points here about the next question that I sent out, because that was a lot of what Venerable covered, I think, where she went into what is the correct attitude then towards us taking and keeping precepts. Yeah. Yes, Venerable Lamsal. Yeah, so he mentioned many things about how the precepts are actually helping us to become more free, to be more useful. I think that's a helpful thing to chew on.
I actually had in terms of what would you say to your dad?
I was about to say to my dad.
Well, I'd be curious, just even ask around but why do you do those things? Because the reason why you kept the precepts is because it's part of a bigger picture and the motivation to attain liberation or awakening. Whereas what motivates your father to do those things? That would be interesting to know, to see because that will definitely affect the outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with him, my best guess is, upholding this idea of being a good citizen was very much a big piece of him and my mother's, you have to be good citizens, contribute to society, take care of other people, and that's not in and of itself a transcendental motivation, right? I mean, it's what we hope for in society. I was going to say something else. And then definitely reputation. Yeah, that's the one thing that he was happy to tell me that there's a Chinese saying, when a tiger dies, it leaves its skin. When a person dies, you leave your name. So it's very important to leave a good name. Yeah, so I'm like, okay. 虎死留皮，人死留名.
Also, in terms of replies to your father,
Hey, Dad.
Yeah. One of the other big differences that I see is how we handle the mistakes that we make. That, certainly since taking the 5 lay precepts, I have lied. And then, in some cases, caught it after the fact. I'm like, that was almost without even thinking about it. Wow, what is underlying that? Purifying it, but then really trying to work on the mental states that support these behaviors. So, working on, decreasing attachment and ignorance and anger, but sometimes also just saying, wow, I need to be more mindful of my speech. And so that's one of the differences I see as well, is that I'm actually taking stock of my behavior, and when there's room for improvement, trying to figure out how to improve rather than saying, well, I'm a pretty good person, good enough.
I think that's something so profound about, or maybe I'm just selling our own squash, whatever, about Buddhist precepts, because you're not taking them just to look good on the outside. The whole point is to look at what's going on inside, right? Like Mark said, because of the precepts, I can see, oh, here's where my attachment is. Oh, this is where I tend to get angry, right? Then because it's restraining my body and speech, it's helping me to see what's driving this behavior. Then I can work on what's inside. Yeah, so I mean, that's something that I think you don't get from the get-go, yeah? Because, it just looks so much like external rules and regulations, right? That's what we're accustomed to. Right. Before I go on about that, Sam, please.
I mean, it's similar. It's like I had this conversation with a friend, which I basically asked the question, like, why are you being? I said, oh, she said, oh, we die. When we die, oh, nothing happens. We just die. So I asked, then why are you being ethical? And then what she said was, I won't survive without other people, so I need to be. It's like it felt like a transactional answer. And I was kind of stumped. Like, I don't know how to reply to that because I'd never crossed my mind. So like, that was just something I thought was interesting. And I'm like, I guess people think that way, and I've never considered. And obviously, they might not really believe that. They were just saying what came up off the top of the head, right?
Yes, Lisa.
So I think, I know both Tom and I always tried to be good people because we liked how it felt. It was nicer to be a good person. But I know particularly working in the corporate world where there's a lot of pressure to do what the company wants you to do what other people want you to do. When I was just saying, hey, I'm not gonna lie, like that, I can't say that it's a lie. What they heard was, you're a bad person. And when I said, I'm a Buddhist and I've taken some precepts around this, and let's figure out a way that we can say this that's truthful, that still gets the message across, because for religious reasons can't say that, then I'm not telling them they're bad. I'm telling them I'm weird. And that was much more easily accepted. And so in that sense, it did free me to not be pressured and pushed out of my ethics, which is what happened. I would break my own ethics because it was too hard to hold them, because people got very upset at thinking I was saying they were bad people. And it was much easier to say, no, I can't do that because I've made some Buddhist promises, but let's figure out a way we can make it work. It was much, much easier for me.
That's such a great example. So, okay, we're going now into this whole topic of what's the correct attitude, right, toward having precepts that Venerable went into in some detail. And this one reminds me of how, so she always says, we've made a decision not to do this thing. Right? We've thought about it, right? We know for ourselves, this is not in line with my values. I don't want to communicate in this way with people. I don't want to, relate to them in this way. And so I take this precept, right, from someone like a teacher I respect, or knowing that it's coming from this whole lineage going back to the Buddha, or these are guidelines laid down by wise beings. So I make this commitment, and then I go into the world, and then stuff happens, right? Causes and conditions come up. And because I have this precept, I can be like, wait, we've thought about this. We don't want to go against something I've made a commitment to. Right? And then in a difficult situation, we can use that as the way to protect ourselves, right? To say, wait, I've made this commitment. For religious reasons, I cannot lie. And everyone's like, what? Yeah, either it's interesting, people hear that you're saying they're bad, or they think you are so weird. Because I've definitely had that. Very early in my working career, my boss told me to forge an invoice. Yeah, so, whatever, we're gonna hire this person anyway. We're just gonna pretend like we called for an open tender, but we're gonna hire this person anyway. So please forge the invoice. I'm like, I can't do that, that's lying, And he was like, huh? So in the end, I stuck to it. And I think I might have said something lame like, but then I have to go tell this monk that I'm doing this and I don't want to do that. So he's like, okay, fine, whatever. So we did not forge the invoice in the end. We found some other way to do it. But yeah, it was like at that time I couldn't say for myself clearly to him why I didn't believe in lying, but just having the precept gave me the strength to like be like, no, I'm going to do something different. Even if this person is more powerful or has some say about my career or whatever, I'm just going to do this differently. And it was amazing to see what became possible after that. And my parents were very happy because they were like, in the civil service, if you forge an invoice, it will come back to haunt you later. You know, they're like, don't be a fool. I'm like, oh. So even on the kind of conventional level, it was helpful. So yeah, precepts protect us from what we have decided we don't want to do, and knowing all the consequences that come with it. Yeah. So we've talked about how it helps to subdue our afflictions. Venerable Rinchen mentioned it increases our mindfulness and introspective awareness. And that is really, really key for progressing to the next step, right? For cultivating concentration. I want to bring to mind, like ages ago, Venerable Jigme gave this really helpful Bodhisattva's Breakfast Corner talk for me. And it's like ancient and I don't remember the title, but she talked about how, you know, especially if you grew up in a Judeo-Christian framework, or just even someone who like tries to be a good citizen and you understand civil law and whatnot, that's how you tend to see the precepts, right? It's good and bad, good and evil. Somebody laid the law, and either you try and find the loophole or you follow it, right? Or, you know, don't get caught. Right, so it's very externally based. And how challenging it is to work with this kind of worldview to come to the Buddhist one, right? Where all of us are saying where we voluntarily take precepts. Nobody made us take them, all 348 of them, right? And more, plus for the fully ordained. Nobody was like, you've got to do this. You know, the Buddha was like, you want to take 5? Go ahead, you know, or less. You know, some people take 1 when they take refuge. You know, it's up to us, right? And to look at our motivation for wanting to do that. And when we genuinely see the benefit, then it's something we're happy to do voluntarily, right? And then we want to come back to it repeatedly throughout the day and in our lives. So I don't know about you, but that's like a huge shift for me in relation to ethical conduct. It's not something imposed by that I have to do. It's I've thought this through and I'm choosing to do this. Yes, Venerable Ngawang.
I just wanted to share one surprise that I've had since taking monastic precepts. And that is that the precepts that prevent us from doing actions that are not naturally non-virtuous, like the ones around food, I find those to be incredibly helpful in giving me the opportunity to see my mind and how my mind is working and how I'm manipulating and scheming all around food. You know, like when to eat and and not having someone buy me, you know, not purchasing food myself. And so what I'm finding is that these precepts are really helping me learn much more about how my mind works. And it's surprising that it's happening with the precepts that I see as like less severe as, you know, like the root precepts. So that's been really interesting. And I also wanted to mention, since I just came back from visiting my family, that I had a very similar conversation with my dad about precepts and why I'm ordained and what's the purpose. And one of the things I said was the robes help remind me that I've taken taken precepts and I want to, act according to ethical conduct. And that did not fly with a non-Buddhist. He's like, well, I can remember not to do those things too. So I realized how it's very difficult to articulate why we do things to non-Buddhist. And so it really helped me to see that I have a lot more thinking to do in terms of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a whole different framework. Yeah, like so for some of us, we've been doing some, listening to Venerable Master Panyin kind of teach in detail, especially about like some of the really, really minor details. And what's interesting is that he said, why do we, for the fully ordained, but I think for the lay people too, you get Lama Tsongkhapa's, stages of the path to awakening, and he breaks down ethical conduct, right? Like, what is the intention? What is the object? What are the heavy objects, light objects, correct objects? It's like, whoa, all right, there's a lot of objects. Yeah. But why do we start with that? Because it's helping us to recognize the objects that our mind comes into contact with. I was like, oh, duh, right? It's like, you're not always looking at your breath or the Buddha. You're in touch with all kinds of different people, different genders, different ages. Where do you put your robes? What do you eat? It's like all these training guidelines, precepts have to do with all the objects that we come into contact with. And then we have to figure out what to do with our mind in relation to all these objects. Like, oh, that's why we start with ethical conduct. It made me think too about how this is how in the Tibetan monasteries, right, you start with the collected topics, which is all about objects. It's objects of perception. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? And that's the very foundation of it. So, the two kind of the basic trainings in both the Chinese and Tibetan traditions for monastics really come together suddenly. You're learning all this detail, but it's about, what is your mind coming into contact with? And how do you want to relate to it now? Or what is it telling you about how you're relating it to, have been relating to it, since beginningless time, probably. Yeah. And then that's why in the Tibetan system, after you do collected topics, then you do minds and awarenesses, right? It's like, oh, what are what are good, beneficial consciousnesses to cultivate, what are totally erroneous ones. Yeah. And so that's how we're trying to relate to all these different objects. Yeah. So yeah, when I think about it this way, then it's like, oh, right, that's why taking ethical precepts helps to lead to the cultivation of concentration. Yeah, I'm understanding all these objects, what my mind's doing in relation to them, how I want to focus my mind, and how to have concentration even just on the day-to-day level, right? Like you have to be mindful of what you're eating, when you're eating, things like that, because you have precepts. Or, with lay people, it's like, yeah, I'm in a bar. I'm the one person not drinking right now. Okay, what am I doing here? Things like that. Right? I was definitely in that situation, right? It's like, oh, okay, yeah, here I am trying to fit in with the group, having an orange juice. Maybe it's time to stop coming to these places. There are other things to do. Yeah. So it does change our life in that way. Venerable pointed out too that because we're coming out of this kind of external power kind of framework, we actually become empowered ourselves to change. And we're not praying to some external savior to fix our bad ethical conduct. Right? Instead, we're like, no, I can do this. Yeah, I take these guidelines, and then if I make a mistake, there are ways to confess it, make amends, purify it. So again, it's a very, very different idea of how to train yourself on a spiritual path. She pointed out too that we request to take precepts, so we're not a consumer, and we're not showing up and being like, give it to me, or I don't know. Yeah, for everyone who's gone for the full ordination, it's a long program, and about a third of it is probably just requesting, right? Bow, request, just getting it in your mind like this is not something easy to receive and not to be taken for granted. Yeah, because in terms of the monastic precepts, it has to come from a whole lineage. You need a certain number of people ordained for a certain period of time who are qualified, who have kept the precepts well themselves to be able to pass them on. So, it's not just something you can show and be like, hey, give it to me. Yeah. So, yeah, it just again changes our whole mindset about how to keep ethical conduct. Yes.
Just wanted to add that before I attended the full ordination, I used to talk about I've taken precepts. And then after that full ordination, I consciously changed my attitude to I was able to receive the precepts. It was a very conscious shift in my attitude about the relationship with the precepts.
Yeah, and also for lay people, you can't just go in front of the Buddha and be like, okay, I'm just gonna get them somehow, right? You have to meet a qualified spiritual teacher, right? Be someone who you have a relationship with. You've heard some teachings. There's a whole long process involved. if you take them at the Abbey, we give you a refuge resource booklet that you read and you fill out a questionnaire and you send in your answers, right? So, it's like a whole thoughtful process, and we're making this kind of commitment for life or for many lifetimes if we take different levels of precepts. But Venerable also emphasized many, many times in her teachings that we don't have to be perfect to take precepts. Did anyone have that issue come up for you? Venerable Pelge, you want to tell us about it? I didn't. I'm like, I need help. I know I'm not perfect.
The reasons why I didn't dare to request, and I remember that time I was in Anagarika, and I was like, do I take, do I not take? I was having this back and forth, like talking on the fence. And then you gave this, that time you were my mentor, and you gave this thing. You said you don't have to be perfect to take precepts, but during the process you will definitely break some of them. But the most important thing is look into your mind. What are you thinking? What is that motivation there? And that stuck with me until today. So I thought that was kind of nice to share.
Yeah, so that's really important for people to remember too, because I know there was another young person who came here who was exploring monastic life, and he had had a very difficult life before that, and he just always felt like, I'm just not good enough. I'm not perfect already, so I can't take these precepts. And that's a very painful mind to have. It's because we recognize that we've been in trouble or, have a lot of faults that need to be cleared up. We're like, yeah, please help. Yeah, I want to take these precepts, so I can come back to them when my mind goes back there. Yeah. And then when I make those mistakes, I know that I've been overwhelmed by the same habits. But now I have these precepts to come back to. I can renew them, I can confess and make amends. Tomorrow, that's what we will be doing, both for the monastics and the lay community here, right? Reflecting on, okay, what did I learn about my mind in the last 2 weeks? What was I able to keep well? What do I still have trouble keeping? What's going on for me in my practice? Right? It becomes a touch point for us to keep checking in versus, I'm such a failure, I always never keep this precept well. I mean, that's totally not the attitude we have toward keeping precepts.
Thing that you mentioned also that was helpful was like small things. For example, I'm in a room with another man, or it's a bright little room, but just the two of us. And you always mention like small things like that you also confess, because you never know what the causes or conditions that arises. Sometimes what happens if one day there's not enough mindfulness, and then there is this attachment to this person, so all these small things will actually add up to cause you to transgress a bigger precepts. So that was something that stuck with me also.
We have to give all the credit to Venerable Chodron, because when I was a beginning nun, so for the lay friends, we have a lot of minor precepts that are meant to protect us from transgressing the major ones. And they say it's like a fence. Yeah, it's the bottom part of our robes. The minor ones are like a fence. So, it's like, whoop. Once you don't want to break through the fence completely. It just helps you to stay restrained. So yes, when I was a very beginning nun, there was one time we were back in Singapore, and we wanted to make a donation to a nonprofit that I used to work for. And then my friend from the nonprofit came. He is a flaming gay man in my mind, right? So old friend, we relate to each other like old friends. We sit together next on a sofa. We're chatting up a storm. And Venerable Chodron's like, excuse me? Optically, it's a young nun sitting next to a young man on a couch chatting up a storm, right? And then later on, she tells me, we have precepts against relating to men in this way as a monastic. And I'm like, but he's gay, right? Don't do that. And she's like, well, what do you think the lay people might think, right? So suddenly it just helped me see like, wow, we're taking this to a whole different level. Yeah, it's not just about me and my friend and what I want, right? But it's also, it affects the faith of all the people in the area who don't know our relationship and background. That's one piece. Yeah. And then also my own mind, right? There's a lot of attachment to the old friend, of course. Like, I just want us to relate in the old ways. So yeah, that was a really good, like, wow, even with these small precepts, so to speak, they really help us start to see, okay, that's what I really need to work on. Yeah, and then we're not perfect, right? So we have the joy of having our teacher point out our faults right there and be like, okay, I gotta think about this one. Confess, make amends. Yeah. So do other people have any other things to add on here about the attitude we have toward taking precepts in addition to these? Yes, Nicole.
I think that when we take and keep precepts, whether or not people know that our behavior is because of precepts or not, it also frees them to act in ways that are more ethical, that sometimes, they may want to do, but for whatever reasons are unable to. For instance, drinking alcohol. When I stopped drinking alcohol at my house, where we routinely had parties and people would drink, my stopping caused other people to stop and actually felt relieved that there wasn't so much alcohol around anymore, and the tone of the social interactions changed a lot. So I think in the same way, we influence other people with the other precepts as well. Like when somebody sees you kindly take an insect outside instead of killing it, they start doing that too. So even aside from precepts, just our behavior that people see, that our precepts, may impel us to do, but just other people witnessing that, it impacts them.
Yeah, and I think actually that comes from keeping the precepts also with a good and a pure motivation. Yeah, because if the other person felt like you were judging them in some way, right, or like saying, "Oh, you're bad for killing flies," they'll be like, "Goody two shoes" or annoying, whatever, right? So it sounds like you just did it very organically, naturally, as just part of the way you live or your belief system, and it's like people are like, "Huh, why would you do that?" And then they're like, "Oh, this might be beneficial." Yeah. Rashika. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to add one more thing onto that. It's like, there was a time when I was in Iraq, and there was a sergeant who far outranked me, but he came up to me super excited because he had taken a camel spider outside. And he knew that I didn't kill, and he wanted to tell me specifically. And he was so proud of himself about it, and it just really warmed my heart.
That is great. Yes, Rashika.
Oh, it's funny that they're saying like your actions inspire other people. Like I didn't kill bugs. So my ex-partner's mom, what they call it, fly Armageddon. She put these like fly traps out, and it attracted like flies from 50 miles away. Like it was so bad, everybody in the house felt guilty. So one day I got a text, and it's like, I did it. I didn't kill the fly. I took it outside. She was just so proud. I was like, yeah. But it was kind of like thinking about like precepts. Of course, I'm not, I'm asking or anything, but the way I kind of look at it is, have you ever seen like when someone plants a tree and they'll put two like wooden planks, one on each side? So I kind of see the precepts like that. The precepts are those two wooden planks tied behind my sapling tree, but they're there not to restrict me, but to help me grow in the direction that I want to grow in, so that, or kind of like those rails they put up at the bowling alley, so you can't do a gutter ball, So that's more the way I look at it. It's helping me go in the direction that I want to go. It's not restricting me. This is where I want to go, and it's helping me get there.
Thank you. That is such a great image. We'll have to store that one, the two by the sapling. No, because too, in all the scriptures you'll see, there are just so many of these very graphic analogies for what the precepts do, right? We recite this every half month. The precepts are like jewels that can be sought tirelessly, right? Or the precepts are like the ground or the earth from which all your good qualities grow. Yeah. So I don't know if people make their own analogies. Yeah. Or, the ornaments that we see on the deities, right? Many of them are ornamented by the perfections and the practice of ethical conduct. Yeah, so that's definitely very helpful to remind ourselves, that these are not restraints that, keep us bound, but are helping us grow in the right direction. Wang Mo?
The more that I've learned about like the more like the beauty of the Dharma, or I should say become more convinced of, and our potential, like Buddha nature, and the more experience I have with other sincere Dharma practitioners and teachers, that really helps me get more clear on the importance of keeping precepts, because I want to realize these things eventually at some point in some life. So that's something, yeah, that has helped me. Like, and this is the foundation, ethical conduct, and it's not just about outward actions. You know, so much of it, the more I look, is inward. You know, thoughts and attitudes too. So that's, yeah, it makes me happy.
Thank you. And just to ride on the metaphor piece, I know in the teachings we always hear, right, like how the three higher trainings relate to each other. The ethical conduct is like our two legs, giving us the firm foundation. And then concentration is like having a strong arm, right? And then the wisdom is having a sharp saw, right? That, or axe, I guess in the past it wasn't I know nowadays I think of the electric saws that we use, but I'm sure in the past it was a very sharp axe, and that helps you to cut down the tree of ignorance, yeah, I guess in there. So you need all three. So you start with the firm basis, the strong arm of concentration, and then get at it to take the root out, yeah.
I've seen also, it's like helped me shift from this very childlike, I want to be a good person, I don't want to be bad, which is also has like a lot of fear, like afraid of being bad, you know, and then all this like guilt and shame, and kind of gets, you know, cleans all that up, kind of dissolves into like, yeah.
Thank you for mentioning that, because I think if we hold our ethical conduct or the idea of precepts with this kind of good, bad judgment, or whether of ourselves, it becomes really difficult to want to take them and keep them. And then we use them to judge other people, which is so painful, which is totally not the purpose of our practice, right? That's like, oh yeah, we're the good ones. Sorry, the rest of you going to hell, right? It's like, that's totally not how we train. Yeah, so that's really important for us to keep coming back to, I think. So yeah, I think in summary, I think of that section, it says, basically we keep precepts to subdue our afflictions. Yeah. And I heard for a start, right? And then we're trying to get to higher states of realization on that basis. This was so difficult for me to even understand. I feel like, yeah, after being ordained, I felt like I heard that again and again at the full ordination when I was there. Like, you are taking these precepts to train yourself, not to train other people. You know, you're not sitting there being like, hey, they didn't keep that precept, so-and-so did this. Yeah, you want to point them out. I mean, that's my judgmental mind, right? It's like, well, if they came and late and did that, why can't I do that? It's like, well, it's none of your business. It's really none of your business. This is about how you are keeping those precepts and what they're telling you about your own mind. You know, what's difficult for you to keep is easy for someone else. What's easy for you to keep is difficult for someone else, right? Because it's all figuring out where you are in your own training. Yeah, and I think that's so important for us as monastics as well to understand it. It's the foundation of our harmony in monastic life, right? Because if we all spent all our time picking on the precepts other people didn't keep, you know, this would be a very difficult place to live. Yeah, versus, you know, okay, where am I in my training? Yeah, I mean, at the full ordination when I was there too, they kept saying, you know, the point of learning these precepts is not to go back and start a revolution at your monastery, right? To be like, hey friends, all of you who didn't study, you're doing it wrong. We just came back and we just heard what was right, so you got to change. Like, no, that's not the point. Yeah, but we can very easily go there as well, and that's something to keep checking up on. Yeah, and then so whether in lay life too, right? Like, oh, I'm the good one. Yeah, I'm doing the right good thing, and you know, sorry, you slob, right? So we're not, taking that kind of attitude. So I think in this section it mentions how we take different levels of precepts to deepen our practice. Yeah, so this section is all about the pratimoksha precepts. This is the Sanskrit word that means individual liberation. Yeah, and it's taken with the intention to abandon harm through our body and speech. So the lay precepts, the monastic precepts are all concerned with these external actions of body and speech. What's interesting about the Chinese tradition is that they explain this term pratimoksha in a slightly different way, like individual liberation in terms of you are liberated in terms of every precept. So not just fighting for your own, striving for your own personal liberation, but like if you keep the precept not to kill, you're liberated in terms of not killing. If you keep the precept not to steal, you're liberated in terms of not stealing. Yeah, and I think they teach it that way too, because sometimes if you break precepts, you feel very discouraged. Yeah, but you have to remember you kept all these other ones as well. So you're liberated in those terms. Does that make sense? Okay, I may have told a lie. I'm really not happy about that. But you know what? I didn't kill. Yeah, I'm free from killing. Yeah, free from stealing. Yeah, so for each precept we keep, we are a step closer to liberation in that way. We are free of that fault. Yeah, so that's like a nice other way to think about it. Yeah, so you don't get so hung up on just like, oh man, I made that one mistake and I'm so bad, right? Please remember, if you took many precepts or you live in accordance with many other guidelines, you are upholding those as well. Yeah, and then when we're ready, then we go a level deeper to take the bodhisattva precepts that start to help us to really look at what's going on mentally, because you can break the bodhisattva precepts by having negative states of mind. And it's helping us to start to really look at our self-centeredness, right? The mental actions that are like, I just want to keep this for myself and I don't want to give to others. Or, you know what? They don't deserve me forgiving them. All those kinds of, thoughts, right? Hanging on to our anger, attachment, and ignorance at deeper and deeper levels. And then eventually when we're ready, we take tantric precepts to help us overcome subtle obscurations. Yeah. But here, I think in this chapter, it's very much focused first on the pratimoksha ethical code. I think we'll get into the bodhisattva precepts later on. So that's what we'll go on a little bit further with in this section. And so, after going into, why the 3 higher trainings are the higher trainings, and then we've talked about the importance of ethical conduct, right? Why we take and keep precepts. Then we get 2 sections of quite a lot of technical detail about all the different levels of precepts that we have in the Pratimoksha ethical code. Yeah, those that are taken for individual liberation, so to speak, at least, but we have a broader aspiration as Mahayana practitioners. So very briefly, we have the 5 lay precepts, right? The 8 one-day lay precepts, and also the novice monk and nun precepts, the training nun precepts, the shikshamana precepts, and then the fully ordained bhikshu, bhikshuni precepts. So when I've covered this topic for a lot of our Vinaya courses, I like to go back to what is the source? What is the scriptural source? So I wanted to share 2 of the suttas I found. Online, it's very interesting. With the lay precepts, it's not entirely clear. Like with the monastic precepts, it's very clear how they evolved. You can just go back to a text, like the origin story of the Vinaya or the ordination, the chapter on the ordination, and it describes in great length how the precepts came about. And what's actually most important to remember is that the Buddha did not get awakened and then he was like, okay, here are 348 rules to follow. And he didn't do that. Yeah, for the first 12 years, there were no precepts. Because the first group of monastics who joined the order were already so pure in their practice. They were very realized beings. They did not need precepts. It's a bit hard to fathom, yeah. But they were ascetics already, or they had already been practicing other paths. So nobody did anything that was contrary to attaining liberation and awakening, for the first 12 years, yeah. And what was interesting is that at that time too, the origin story of the Vinaya has, it's a famine. Can I tell the story? Because I love it so much. You're just stuck anyway. And the lay people are probably not going to read it. Yeah. So it starts with the Buddha actually meeting a Brahmin. I forget where he was. And this Brahmin comes to question the Buddha. He's like, you're really rude. You don't get up and bow to elder Brahmins. You have a bad attitude and so on. And he's insulting and criticizing the Buddha. And the Buddha, of course, is completely calm, and every insult that the Brahmin lobbies at him, he turns it around. Yeah, he's like, oh, Gautama has bad taste. He's like, that is true. I no longer have taste for the 5 sense desires. Yeah, or Gautama is, too reclusive. He's like, indeed, I'm a recluse from the afflictions. Yeah, so he had just this incredible back and forth. At the end of which the Brahmin is like, okay, all right, I'm going to take refuge, right? Because you are definitely realized and I am not. Okay, yeah. And he says, please come to my village. I'm going to offer the rains, during the rains retreat, please come with all your monastics. I will support you. So the Buddha travels there with all his monastics. And unfortunately, there is a famine. And then it's said, for different reasons, that the layperson basically forgot that he was going to support the Buddha and the monks. Yeah, so some accounts say because of Mara's interference, or some say, it was, he was just busy and forgot, basically. So the Buddha does not call him up and yell at him. He's like, okay. So they live in like a compound next to some horse breeders. Yeah, so the horse breeders then give up part of the horse feed to the Sangha. They had 500 horses. So if every horse gets half the feed, then they have 500 portions to give to the 500 monks. Yeah. And in some versions of this story, the 500 horses are like bodhisattvas or something, or anyway, so there are many readings of the text. But so now we have the Buddha eating horse feed. And the Venerable Ananda, the attendant, pounds the feed, and feeds, and the Buddha consumes it. In one version, I think the Ananda is very sad and heartbroken that the Buddha has to eat horse feed. And the Buddha is like, well, taste this. And Ananda eats it and it tastes like delicious nectar. He's like, yep, that's what I'm tasting, or something like that. So, because the Buddha is completely free of afflictions and karma, right? So he's not going to suffer the misery of eating horse feed. But here the Buddha says, he was very proud of the monks. I think he said, wow, everyone is indeed just only eating what they've received. And he tells the Venerable Ananda, no, it's good, you are true practitioners. Yeah. In the future, there will come monastics who will complain even when they have rice and meat. And I read this, I'm like, oh, I think the first time I read this, I cried. Because I thought, oh, I'm one of these people who complains. It's like, he says something like, you are true practitioners, and you have really like won the fruits of the spiritual path. Yeah, the resources you get are hard won. In future, there will be people who are reaping the benefits of your practice who will complain. Yeah, I'm like, ouch, that's me. Yeah, but so it's very sobering that way. Yeah, they keep the precepts very purely. And then at this time, the Venerable Mogglayana, who's famous for his supernormal powers, comes and says to the Buddha, look, everybody is starving. Can I just take everybody by supernormal powers and we'll fly to this other place and get food? Yeah, and Buddha's like, no. And he's like, okay, I have supernormal powers. Can I just like flip the ground and there's like plants under the ground and we're going to eat them? And the Buddha's like, no, that will cause everybody to be very distressed on the planet, if you flip the ground over. So here it's like emphasizing that the precepts are established for us ordinary monastics. We're not depending on supernormal powers to feed ourselves, to fly off and solve our problems. He's like, no, if that's how you solve your problems, the Sangha is not going to last in the world. We have to depend on, our training. Yeah, and our just keeping the precepts as ordinary monastics. So that's often what is explained with that section. And then somehow it gets to, I think still during the famine, Shariputra is in meditation, and the Venerable Shariputra, starts to reflect what causes the Buddha's teachings to last in the world for a long time. And so he goes and asks the Buddha, he's like, how is it that these Buddhas, some of them, their teachings last for a long time and some did not? And then the Buddha explains that it was the Buddhas that established a pratimoksha, this whole set of ethical guidelines, where the monastics recited the precepts every half month, where the Buddhas taught extensively and all these teachings were recorded. Those were the Buddhas whose teachings lasted for a long time, even after the elders and the disciples had passed away. And so Shariputra says, please, Buddha, please lay down the pratimoksha, please give us these precepts. And the Buddha says, no, I can't. You can only have the precepts when the conditions arise. Then Shariputra is like, then what are these conditions? Yeah, he's like, well, when the Sangha gets big, when the Sangha has a lot of wealth, when the Sangha has property, when there are more and more monastics who have afflictions, then we will need precepts. Yes. Until then, we're not going to have them. So I'm like, wow, so he knew in good time, right? So he's not going to establish precepts for no reason. And you'll see that's how we learn the precepts too. Every single one comes into being because of specific causes and conditions. You always learn the origin story to understand like what was the affliction driving that person? What were all the causes and conditions that came about? Where did it happen? Were they in the monastery? Were they in their lay home? Were they in a village? Yeah, and then you try and relate that to your situation now. Yeah. So I think that's also, that's why these precepts are truly training guidelines. They really happened, based on specific incidents where people did things that were not conducive to their own practice, to the benefit of the lay people, and then the Buddha said, okay, now we have to have this guideline. And there were always exceptions. You'll see too, all kinds of things would happen, and he'd be like, wait, okay, is the exception in this case, not that case, and so on. So it's a living practice. It's not like, here's this 10 commandments and you follow them this way. Like the more you study them, it's like, what's the state of your mind? Who are the people involved? How do we live this in the situation that we're in? Rashika?
Venerable, I just have a question. If, why did they become monastics then if they didn't need precepts? I know that might sound like a duh question, but I thought the whole point of becoming monastic is to train your mind. But if they didn't need any of that, they were already realized, why did they become monastics?
I don't think they had the same realizations as the Buddha. So like the first 5 disciples that he went to teach, right? I mean, they were already ascetics who were wearing robes and had shaved their heads, but they still had to receive teachings from the Buddha, right? So he gave teachings, and then one of them, upon hearing, all conditioned phenomena are impermanent, then the Venerable Konanda is like, oh, stream entry, it's like, well then, right? So, so the first group of monastics came together to receive teachings from the Buddha. And it's very sweet. In the ordination skandaka, it says in the beginning, I think there were 5 of them. So 3 would go on alms round, 2 would stay and listen to teachings, and then the 3 would get food for the 5 and bring it back, and they would share it. And then they would take turns like that. So from the very beginning, you have this kind of community life. Some people get teachings, and while the others might go out and get food, and then they support each other in their practice. Yeah. So I would think that's why. And then it gets to a point where there are 112 arhats. Then the Buddha says, okay, you should go out in different directions to teach. Yeah. But very early on too, I think right under the Bodhi tree, there were people who took refuge. The lay people who met the Buddha took refuge. But it's not clear if they had precepts immediately. Yeah. And then at some point in the ordination skandaka, it says, like when King Bimbisara and his thousands of lay followers went to see the Buddha, they all received refuge and precepts. So, but what I've seen online, it's the people who've done like this research into the early scriptures say that one of the suttas where we see the 5 precepts mentioned is called the sutta on overflowing merit. So this is from the Numbered Discourses 8.39. It's the Numbered Discourses, Anguttara Nikaya, 8.39, and it's called Overflowing Merit. And I just want to read briefly from it because it just kind of ties in so nicely to everything that we've been saying about why we take and keep precepts. Yeah, so it begins with the Buddha saying, mendicants, there are these 8 kinds of overflowing merit, overflowing goodness. They nurture happiness and are conducive to heaven, ripening in happiness and leading to heaven. They lead to what is likable, desirable, agreeable to welfare and happiness. What are these 8? So the first 3 are going for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So he talks about that being 3 kinds of overflowing merit. Then he says, next, mendicants, these 5 gifts are great, primordial, long-standing, traditional, and ancient. They are uncorrupted as they have been since the beginning. They are not being corrupted now, nor will they be. Sensible ascetics and Brahmins don't look down on them. What are these 5? And then he starts to explain the 5 precepts. So these are sources of overflowing merit. He's not like, these are rules like if you break, you will go to hell, right? Or like, you're bad if you don't do them. He's saying, no, these are gifts. These are wonderful gifts. So, yeah. And it's a gift to not just yourself, but to other beings around you, right? He says here, firstly, a noble disciple gives up killing living creatures. By doing so, they give to countless sentient beings the gift of freedom from fear, enmity, and ill will. And they themselves also enjoy unlimited freedom from fear, enmity, and ill will. This is the first gift that is a great offering, primordial, long-standing, traditional, and ancient. It is uncorrupted as it has been since the beginning. It's not being corrupted now, nor will it be. Sensible ascetics and Brahmins don't look down upon it. This is the fourth kind of overflowing merit. Yeah. So then that gets repeated for every single one of the 5 precepts. Yeah. So to think that by taking these precepts, we are giving a gift. That's what we've all mentioned already, to sentient beings, of freedom, a gift of freedom to others and ourselves. And it's an offering. So yeah, it's just such a beautiful way to think of ethical conduct. Yeah. So that's the sutta source for the 5 lay precepts. And with the 8 one-day precepts, which our lay friends are going to take tomorrow, and we'll be taking the 8, all of us take the 8 Mahayana precepts. Yeah. But here in the Pali Canon, it comes from also the numbered discourses, 3.7. It's called the roots of the Uposatha. And I'm not sure, someone has to look at what Uposatha means, the etymology, I don't actually know it. We call it the posada. But here it's interesting, the Buddha talks about 3 ways to observe the Uposatha. Yeah. And it starts with, it seems to have been like a practice already done in the Buddha's time, right? Every half month, people come together and observe this as like a holy day. And the Buddha says, okay, there are 3 types of Uposatha. One is the Uposatha of a cowherd. So what does a cowherd do? He reflects on where the cows went. The cows went there, they ate this and that. Tomorrow they will go there and eat this and that. And then the cowherd reflects, today I ate this and that, and tomorrow I will eat this and that. And the Buddha says, when this Uposatha of a cowherd is undertaken, it is not of great fruit or great benefit, not of great glory or great radiance. Right? So, that's kind of how we are as ordinary beings. Yeah, you just spend your day thinking about what you did for your job and what you ate and what you didn't. And, it is Buddha says, he spends the day with an awareness imbued with that covetousness, with that greed. Yeah, so to be avoided. And then next he talks about the Uposatha of the Jains. So here, they have their specific practices where they only protect beings who live within 100 leagues in every direction. Yeah. So the Buddha says, they only have kindness and sympathy to some beings, but not others, and only within this radius. And they are also naked ascetics. So on Uposatha day, they strip off their clothing and say, I am nothing by anything nor of anything. There is nothing by anything or of anything that is mine. Let's not do that tomorrow. So that's the Uposatha of the Jains, right? So basically engaging in spiritual practices that at the time were popular, I guess, but misunderstanding that they will lead to higher states. Yeah? Going about naked does not lead to liberation and awakening, Yeah, so he says, again, when the Uposatha of the Jains is undertaken, it is not of great fruit or great benefit, not of great glory or great radiance. Then he says, what is the Uposatha of the noble ones? It is the cleansing of the defiled mind through the proper technique. How is the defiled mind cleansed through the proper technique? So he talks about the 6 recollections, right, of the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, of generosity, the devas, and your own virtue, I think. And then he goes into the 8 precepts. And it's beautiful how the text is so similar to the text of the precepts that we take. Yeah, I'm just going to read the first one. Right, so how do we cleanse our defilements? The disciple of the noble ones reflects thus. As long as they live, the arahants, abandoning the taking of life, abstain from the taking of life. They dwell with their rod laid down, their knife laid down, scrupulous, merciful, compassionate for the welfare of all beings. Today, I too, for this day and night, abandoning the taking of life, abstain from the taking of life. I dwell with my rod laid down, my knife laid down, scrupulous, merciful, compassionate for the welfare of all living beings. By means of this factor, I emulate the arhants, and my uposatha will be observed. So remarkable, yeah, the similarities, yeah, like we say, to eliminate famine, to eliminate sickness, yeah, we've laid down our load. It's just incredible that as an oral tradition, you have these scriptures preserved in different places, in different languages, and it's the same thing. Yeah, so even if you're taking these individual liberation precepts for one day, there's the mention here, you're doing this out of compassion for the welfare of all beings. And that's how the arhats practice for that purpose. Yeah. So that's the source for the 8 precepts. Right. And then we talked about how, in the ordination skandaka, it really lays out, how the whole process of ordination was evolved, how it started with giving 3 refuges, how it came to be that the children monastics were given 10 precepts as novice monks and nuns. And then later on, there were nuns who also took training precepts, and how it came to be that there were fully ordained monks and nuns. And how we get ordained is that a group of 10 fully ordained monks has to give the precepts for the monks. Yeah. And the preceptor must have been ordained for at least 10 rains retreats, or 10, not just 10 years, so to speak, but you have to have observed 10 rains retreats. And for the nuns, you need 10 fully ordained monks and 10 fully ordained nuns. And then again, the preceptor has to have observed a certain number of rains retreats. So it's not so easy for this to happen, So so it goes into how that evolved. All right. And then finally, just at the end of this section, there's also a very, so these sections are fairly technical. I don't think I'm going to go into all this kind of detail. But at the very end, there's a little section here on the different Vinaya schools. So we talked about that at the very beginning, right? After the Buddha passed away, right? The Buddha taught one Vinaya, basically, right? But it starts to evolve as Buddhism spreads to different places. And it's said that there were 18 different Vinaya schools. And then eventually what we have today, there are 3 extant lineages, right? The Theravada, which you see in Southeast Asia, South India, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and so forth, right? And then we have the Dharma-Guptaka Vinaya that is practiced mainly in China, East Asian countries, Taiwan, Japan, not Japan anymore, Korea, and so on. And then the Mula Sravasti Vinaya that is practiced in the Tibetan tradition. Tibet, Mongolia, Himalayan regions. Okay. But I think what is the key point here that we can kind of reflect on at the very end is how, the Vinaya was a living practice. Right? The Buddha taught one set of regulations, but as they were passed to different places, the circumstances are different. People have to keep precepts, in some of the minor precepts, especially in different ways. Right? It's like it said, what is expensive in one place is cheap in another. What is easy to get in one place is difficult in another. So you can't just hold them so literally, like, we have to do it exactly the same way the Buddha did in the Buddha's time. Yeah. And so we see with the evolution of these different traditions, I think it's just a good reminder of how, for Buddhism to survive in the world, there's the passing down of the tradition, right? The root precepts are all the same. It's amazing how, again, through all this time in all these different schools, the key precepts are all the same. Where they vary are in the minor precepts. And that has a lot to do with adaptation to culture. And we're living that process now, right? For the Buddha Dharma to flourish in the West, how are we going to live as a monastic community? What do we have to hold tightly or like in the Buddha's time, and what do we adapt? And I think Venerable Chodron's been giving some wonderful talks about that recently. So that's something for us to really keep in mind. Okay, that's where I wanted to go with this review, and we are at time, but are there any final comments, questions, people online?
I just wanted to ask, it seems like the Bodhisattva vows, like in the Chan tradition and in the Tibetan tradition, it almost seems like they feel different. Like why is that exactly? Because they both have references to like the mind and thoughts, but it seems like Tibet it's almost like higher, like you need more concentration, or?
No, I mean, the why part, someone I'm sure has written a dissertation about it, but it's historical. The sources are just different. So I think the Chinese, the Bodhisattva precepts as practiced in the Chinese Buddhist tradition usually come from the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra. Is that Yogacara? They're called the Yogacara precepts. Those are the ones taken by the lay people because they don't have a vow of celibacy. That's my understanding. I have not studied those. The monastics will take the Bodhisattva precepts from the Brahma's Net Sutra. So all of us who got ordained in Taiwan will get like a commentary on those. Yeah. And some aspects of those are quite cultural too, I think. I don't know. That's how but anyway, so that's the source. Yeah, whereas for the Tibetan tradition, the source is more varied. It is at the back of the red book. Right? Did someone memorize the list? Anyway, there's a nice footnote in the red book telling you where all our precepts come from, yeah, from different sutra sources that they were put together from. Yeah, so that's the key thing. But you're working with how to cultivate the 6 far-reaching attitudes. That is the key purpose of those precepts, how to develop those far-reaching mental states. Okay, nothing online. Tracy?
On the chart on page 96, it says there's Malastivada, sorry, Bhikshuni, and I thought you said that there were no fully ordained. So is that just a category that, what's my question? So that's a tradition that isn't living at the moment? Is that, oh, I see, okay.
Yeah, so, it said that the Mula Sravastivada is the lineage that was brought to Tibet, and only monks made that journey across the Himalayas to transmit the precepts. So there weren't any nuns who survived that journey or made it. Yeah. So the Mula Sravastivada Bhikshuni lineage never traveled to Tibet. That's what is said. Yeah.
So it's fully documented and the precepts are known and the, oh, okay.
So
okay.
the scriptural source is known. Yeah, it's amazing in the Chinese, I think they found the Sanskrit fragments too, like Venerable Chodron's done incredible work putting together the Sanskrit Bhikshuni ordination and comparing it to the Tibetan one. So she has a book out about that. Yeah, but in the Chinese, there are 5 Vinayas that were translated into Chinese, as it tells us. And then later on, the Pali Vinaya was translated into Chinese as well. So all those have the full set of origin stories, all the precepts for bhikshus, bhikshunis. Yeah, and then the Chinese Vinaya masters spend a lot of time cross-comparing them. This is what it says in ours, but what about that one? And what about that one? And what about that? Then you have these compendiums of charts. It's like, okay. So you can really, whoops. Busted. Oh, the Mula Shavastivada. Yeah. So you can really get into it. Yes, Venerable Sepul made a very good point. The 84,000 project that is translating the whole Tibetan canon into English has a team that's been working very hard on the monastic precept section. Yeah, so they have all the origin stories. The Mula Sravastivada, I think, is the longest in terms of all the origin stories and all the chapters that follow. That many of the chapters have started to be published on their website. So the key ones for ordination, reigns, the pravarna, the invitation at the end of reigns, and posada, those are all in English on the 84,000 website. So you can read them and cross-reference with the Chinese and write your dissertation. No, I mean, figure out how to live in precepts. Yes, Venerable Kumka.
There's 2 questions online.
Okay.
Jolene asks, how often should we take 8 precepts?
Oh, you mean like the 8 Mahayana or one-day precepts? Yeah, depending. Usually it's done every half month, right? On the 1st and the 15th day of the lunar calendar, the lunar month. So every half month is a good time. I mean, often in Singapore, in a small place like that, you can go to a temple and have a teacher give you the precepts. For the Mahayana precepts, if a qualified teacher has given you the lineage already, then you can take them yourself in front of a Buddha statue. But often too, people like to just go and receive them from a teacher, or you can, many temples also do like the 8 one-day precept retreat. So you can do that as well.
And then someone else asks, do normal people have to follow precepts? In case we want to have a positive change in the world, can people practice without precepts?
Oh my God, we're weird. We're not normal people. Do you mean non-Buddhists? Or what do you think? What do you mean by precepts? You know, for quote normal people, what does that even mean? Yeah. Okay, but generally, I think for a lot of us, I don't know about you, right? But often, like, before I formally took the precepts, I tried living in them first. You know, it's like, let's check it out. How am I going to get through my day without lying? Yeah, like there are a lot of things I used to tell white lies about. It was just a normal part of my life. It's like, can I actually tell someone I don't want to go to this event? Yes, you can. Instead of pretending you're sick or whatever, you know? Yeah, so I think that would be the first step. You know, this step, if you are interested in the Buddhist ethical conduct, what we lay out as harmful and non-harmful actions, start there, right? Just see, how does it feel to live with them, in them, right? Then that can help you decide whether you feel a need to go to some kind of public ceremony where you formalize your commitment, right? You're taking them from a teacher, you're taking them in front of holy beings who are your witness, that sort of thing. You're making very broad aspirations behind them, right? Oh, by taking these precepts, you know, may I eliminate all non-virtue, cultivate all virtue, liberate all sentient beings. And that's what you yell at the full ordination. By taking these precepts, this is what I vow to do. So, you know, do you want to do that? Right? Or if it's much more private, it's just how am I living this day to day? That's great. Yeah. And then I think most importantly is to check, what does this do for my mind? And how is this influencing my relationships? Yeah. Before I called myself a Buddhist, that was what kept me interested and going. You know, I was actually, just back in the day, I remember I took precepts because I wanted to improve my concentration. It was a very high achiever thing. I started meditating, I was like, how come I can't concentrate? Irritating. And then it's like, oh, you hear the teachings that say, well, if you have ethical conduct, you will concentrate better. I'm like, really? Okay, let's try. Right? Not drinking. Oh, it definitely helped. Huh. Fancy that. Right? So just testing it out. It's like, oh, my meditation is better. I'm not drinking anymore. Great. Yeah. So whatever it is, you know, the most important thing is to come back and see, what does it do for my mind? And is it benefiting the people around me when I keep ethical conduct? Okay, so we can thank you all for your participation, and yeah, we can maybe take a moment to just sit quietly and digest everything we've heard, the wealth of practice that everyone has shared. And for those of us here, or also people who are practicing on the 15th day of the lunar month, we can rejoice that tomorrow we will have the opportunity to take 8 Mahayana precepts, keeping these teachings and the motivations for taking and keeping precepts in mind. We also have the opportunity to use these precepts to reflect on our practice for the last 2 weeks, and to, you know, reveal any faults that we want to work with, and to seek support in overcoming them and continuing to purify the defiled mind and progress on the path to full awakening. We can dedicate. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. In the snowy mountain pure land, you're the source of good and happiness. Powerful Tenzin Gyatso Chenrezi, may you stay until samsara ends.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Losang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Peerless Supreme Spiritual Leader, Omniscient King of the Shakyas, Motherly Tara, Supreme Bestower of longevity and wisdom, vast ocean assembly of sources of refuge, grant propitiousness here and now for a nectar of benefit and bliss to flow. With a clear mind of extensive learning gained from following the wondrous traditions of Thubten, the Able One's teachings, you bring clarity to masses of disciples with the light of Chodron, the lamp of the Dharma. May your lotus feet remain unfaltering for a very long time. Through your dharmic deeds of hearing, thinking, meditating, and so on, place those who seek the liberated path in harmony through immaculate discipline. Please lead all beings to liberation with undeclining excellent qualities of scripture and insight, and establish them in the glory of eternal bliss. May the deeds of explaining and practicing the Dharma, done by groups supporting the teachings and their upholders, who spread the view of dependent arising and non-violent actions in the 10 directions, and especially at Sravasti Abbey in the West, flourish.
Do we have a review next Friday, or is it retreat? Right, so next Friday, we'll start our Standing Up for Compassion retreat, so there won't be